So I have always said, always, time and time and time and time and time again, right? That local elections are as just as important as what goes on in Westminster. The biggest problem we are going to see tomorrow at this point is turnout. And turnout in local elections is historically low. Historically low. Like in my town, the last time we had a local election, the turnout was 25%. Now, we don't have one this time, but 25% is awful. Awful. But your local council is your best direct democracy action you could ever take, because you can meet your local councillors, you can talk to them, you can go to meetings really easily in your local town hall. You can do a lot of stuff. You can put forward a proposal for those councillors to talk about. You could ask, even have time to speak. There's a ton of stuff you can do at a local level you can't at a national level. Right? So important. And yet, tomorrow, there are going to be the people who are voting tomorrow are going to be those who are most politically motivated. So it is inevitable tomorrow that Reform UK are going to win seats. The question is, of course, how many? I think between 200 and 250. They aren't going to, so we say, surpass their UKIP high of 500. They can't at this election. The Lib Dems are going to take a lot of seats themselves. So will independents. Like I say, last time we had this election, it was the biggest win by independents in a local election history. But local elections matter so much. So much, because you get people at a local level who care about what happens in your town. That's why they run. You do not get paid to be a local councillor, even though people disagree and say, oh, no, they do. You get expenses, but you don't get a lot for those expenses. You have to take it out of your own time and your own responsibilities. And I've said before how that in itself creates another problem at a local democracy level as well. But again, that's beside the point. But now, remember, back in the day, and you can even Google this, if you put UKIP candidate UKIP councillor suspended, it will bring you back a litany of results of councillors who were elected back in the days of UKIP, who got elected and then got suspended and given the boot because they would go on insane, like, racist rants. And then they would get suspended. And then you would have another by-election, and then you would actually vote in someone who gave a damn, Yeah, that's what's going to happen as well. Bear in mind, as it also came out, UKIP actually penciled that in. They know that even after they won, they would lose a certain amount of councillors because some were just, wingnuts. And I want to go over this because I think, once again, this is worth going over. So what happens if Reform actually win in the local elections? And we go win here. What actually happens? Well, honestly, from what we can see, directly centrally controlled by an office in London. Good luck with that. Good luck trying to control and centrally control local politics, Reform UK. That's going to end in an absolute disaster. But let's have a look at this to say, because like I say, people are going to go to the polls tomorrow. So I think this is worth having a look at. But before we do go over to that, Please do remember to click the like, share, and subscribe button. Down below, there are links to my Patreon page. Pardon me. My YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, the Pony Club down below as well. So, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help support the channel. Like I say, it is Wednesday, so there will be a Pony Club video for the Pony Clubbers, the YouTube subscribers we've got down below, and of course, the Patreon people as well. So, watch out for that. And of course, let's crack on then into this. So, Fleet Street Fox, a very, very, very good columnist, has been for years for the Mirror, wrote about this. So what happens if Reform actually win in the local elections? So millions of ballot papers have been sent out to voters who don't know who they hate the least, so won't bother voting at all. Yep, won't bother voting at all. Remember, there's no local election in my constituency this time, so there's no vote happening. There's no vote taking place. But last time we had a local election, turnout was 25%. I've already seen a lot of people on the left going, well, if the turnout for these elections is anything below 27%, then Labour's screwed. 27% would be an amazing turnout for a local election. Wow, anything higher than 27% would be amazing for a turnout for a local election. Do you realize how good a turnout that would be? When local election turnout has been historically just going down and down and down. Anyway, let's continue with this. Millions of more, of course, will have gone out to voters who know exactly who they hate and will be very definitely voting for one or the other. On Thursday, Britain will be very much split between those who can and cannot be asked to decide whether they will have social care, how often their bins get emptied, and if funding priority will be given to potholes or green spaces. And at the end of the day, that is the job of a local council, deciding where their funding priorities are. Most people in Reform UK are running on immigration. Councils do not get to decide immigration, but there you go. And that's why they end up going on these unhinged rants on this. But anyway, the Mirror is just bizarre amount it goes into on advertising. That's why there's that big gap. Anyway, back to this. So local elections are probably the most direct and most important forms of democracy because you pick someone, you have a vague chance of actually meeting who can actually change what happens in your street and will charge you directly for the privilege, of course, referring to council tax. Yeah, they traditionally have low turnouts. Like I say, the average turnout in the UK, like across the country, is 30, I think it's 30%, roughly 30%. However, you're talking across the UK. If you take individual constituencies, you see it even lower than that. Like I say, my own constituency, last time we had local elections, turnout was 25%. Like I say, we'll be having a look at the turnout rates for some of these council races, and I can guarantee you it is going to be low. We're talking low 20s for the turnout. So, yeah, of course, they have traditionally low turnouts and are generally based on what is happening, of course, in London, which is objectively bonkers. It is like using the tide tables to decide whether to have a cheese and pickle sandwich for lunch. I would agree on that. I would absolutely agree on that. Why on earth would you vote, or at least decide your vote on what is happening in London? Because guess what? Your local councillors have no say over what happens down in Westminster. They have everything to do what is happening in your local town. That is what matters to them. That is what they are there to do. But so many people just go, well, I don't think this particular government is going to do good, so I'm not going to vote for this particular party, or I'm just not going to vote at all. And as a result, you end up with good councillors being removed. And basically, you've got to roll the dice. You've really got to roll the dice at that point and hope that their replacement, whoever gets voted in, is good. Because if they're not, and they're one of these crackpot lunatics in reform, well, good luck. Good luck. So, if someone doesn't like, of course, the government of the day, they'll, of course, vote for the opposition. That's what cleared out all the Tory seats and set Keir Starmer up for government last time. But he's due a bloody nose for now means testing the winter fuel payment, the budgets, which have now gone down like a vegan smoothie made from tumours. Again, you know, I've said this before. There is nothing wrong with means testing the winter fuel payment. Where the argument should have been is where that actual line is. That there has been no pensioner that is, quote, frozen to death because they lost their winter fuel payment. Otherwise, the papers would have been all over that particular case. And yet, the budgets, I kind of like the last budget. We'll see what happens in a couple of weeks when we get the new one. But so far, they've not been too bad. They've been, you know, bear in mind, don't like everything, of course, that's been said, but they've not been too bad, really, compared to, like, you know, previous budgets we've had. One in particular, which, you know, almost, you know, crashed the economy, you know. But it's nice having competent government again, you know. But there you go. Kimmy Badenoch is, of course, currently leading the opposition round in circles. That leaves now the ground wide open, of course, for the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, and Reform UK, whose leader Nigel Farage is now talking a good war about how they're going to absolutely smash what they've never actually managed to smash before. Yet their candidates, as so often have been the case, have now been found to include the sort of wingnuts that probably couldn't run a bath without punching themselves in the face and claiming it was anti-white goods discrimination. Oh, truer words have never been said about reform candidates. Truer words indeed. And like I said at the beginning, hey, if you don't go out and vote, or you don't go out and say, I'm going to put someone we know is at least competent in your local government, well, good luck, because you are going to feel the consequences of that. So, what would happen if Reform UK actually managed for once to do what Nigel Farage keeps saying it can? Bear in mind, as we keep on reminding you, if you say even the local, like all these stuff, oh my God, Reform's so popular in these polls, but then why isn't it transferring to elections? Because remember, over 240 plus by-elections at this point, they've only won 14. That is not a good electoral record. So, these are, of course, local elections, which can seize control of local authorities. 3 local mayoral elections, and the winners can, of course, wield a much wider influence. And, of course, a by-election in Runcorn. If Nigel chalks up a win in any of them, his party will, of course, be in the ascendant. Another MP, another voice on the national stage, or maybe a clutch of councils, which, of course, will build his activist base. And that is another thing that should be discussed. The fact that actually a lot of reform activists aren't that particularly good. They are not particularly good. I know a couple of people who live in Doncaster, where there is a race going on currently. They have, shall we say, less than nice things to say about some of these activists who have been doing the door knocking for reform. Or I should say, some of their conversations they've been having with them. So, the trouble is, of course, with such a win, that would mean responsibility. And there is one thing that Nigel has never had a grasp of, and that's what that word means. As an MEP with responsibility on the Fisheries Committee, he barely turned up. As an MP, he's skipping plenty of votes and still couldn't even find his constituency, Clacton-on-Sea, if he wasn't being chauffeur-driven. Again, why do people think Nigel Farage is so good, champion of the people, when he doesn't do the job that people elect him to do? And that isn't even beginning to like scratch the surface of all the other like very legitimate criticism you can give of Farage. And of course, the councils with supporters have had a crack at least running in the past, have seen to now fall out of their not very competent hands. Again, very true on that. Being a local councillor is, of course, a rotten business. No pay, and having to wrestle now huge finance and stressful disasters, most of which now the well intentioned people elected have no qualifications for. Reform currently has 128 local councillors out of a possible 18,740 seats. That is a total of 0.68% of the total. He would need to land more than 500 to look like he was at least moving, which would almost be how a third of the seats up for grabs. And like I say, remember, 500. 500 is that magic number because that was the maximum UKIP ever had in 2016. That was their height. They never had more than 500. They've only got 128 now. There is 900. The Tories are defending 940 seats in this particular election. It is inevitable they will lose seats. But of course, we say there's more than reform in this game. You've got Labour, you've got Lib Dems, you've got Greens, and more importantly, you've got independents. Never discount the independents at a local election. At a national, oh, absolutely, you can discount an independent. Of course, they've got to have a massive local movement behind them to really get them elected. But at a local election, never discount an independent. So the chances of that are, of course, very slim. Not only, of course, does he lack the party machinery due to drive a ground war, but the campaign group Hope Not Hate has now unearthed candidates making favourable posts, of course, about Hitler, far-right conspiracy theories, and, of course, dropping a nuclear bomb on Islam. Gee, surprise, surprise. It's all exactly going like it did in the UKIP days. And this is, of course, all after Reform set up the vetting process. If, of course, Reform lands another MP, it would, of course, merely get their numbers back up to 5. And they had just last year before one of them was booted out over bullying allegations. If he lands a mayoralty, he's in real trouble because it is a job that comes with a huge profile and most likely the winner and Andrea watch the birdie Jenkins is no wallflower. That's very true as well. If Jenkins wins that mayoralty somehow, she's gonna come with a huge profile on that. We've seen before that Farage does not like to share the spotlight. How long before Andrea Jenkins and Nigel Farage fall out? So if Reform's equivalent of Andy Burnham is someone who, of course, likes to make a splash, Nigel will lose some of the spotlight. And as we said, he doesn't like that. And it is that spotlight the entire party relies on. Without Nigel, there is no Reform UK. And there are some millionaires and, quote, city boys teamed up with the perpetual angry Nigel that brings the pub bore charisma, tobacco stained, I'll have a pint and another war please barman sort of person, which other nations think we're all like. If people vote Reform on Thursday, they are not voting, of course, for the local bloke. They are voting for Nigel. That is very, very true. So many people do not care about the particular candidate of their Reform. They do not care. They are voting for Nigel without even realizing Nigel Farage does not care. He does not do his job. And you think he's going to be good? There was the quote that's been doing the rounds from Aaron Banks, who basically said, yeah, if he wins, he'll appoint a deputy mayor and then he'll make him do all the work and all the decisions. He's just like, um, no, you can't do that, my friend. If you are running for a seat and you win it, then guess what? You have to do the job. Otherwise, why are you running for that mayoralty? But we'll see what happens. So, having, of course, a figure like that that could eclipse him will, of course, end the party as surely as turning on the lights and opening the front door. There are plenty of people who will vote based on local housing plans, wind farms, bypasses, jobs, business rates, schools, but reforms policies on all these things are invisible to the naked eye and absolutely barking if you can read between the microdots on the campaign leaflets. Pinning people's hopes to that unjustified plans of lunatics is nothing but, but an invitation now to long-term failure. Just ask Brexit. I think that's it. Oh yeah, here we are. But the biggest risk Nigel runs is that any significant win will move him closer to Downing Street. He'll, of course, look like a winner, but instead a whinger. He won't just be in the far right chair on Question Time, but on every news bulletin. And that means one thing: scrutiny. And this is the whole thing that Nigel Farage hates. He hated it during the UKIP days, hated it during the Brexit Party days. He hates scrutiny because if he gets, quote, closer, then the media spotlight will really start to focus in on him and people start to ask questions he won't like to have the answer for. So his finances, again, valid questions that have constantly come up through the years. The party's bizarre funding habits, again, very true indeed. Why are they going abroad to try and get foreign money to fund their party? Very, very interesting question to ask. Of course, connections with Trump, his past support of Putin, his actual policies. These would all be topics for every local and national journalist and every political opponent that needs to kneecap him. Very true indeed. He does not have the operation that could withstand that, nor the character to enjoy it. It would be disastrous. We've talked about this before. We've already talked about this. If he wins, quote, big tomorrow, he's in charge. That scrutiny gets put on him. That will not go well for him. That will not go well for him at all. He, of course, poses a bigger risk. With a tiny mandate that he already guides the utterances now of government and, of course, the opposition. Labour and the Tories have tacked right to try and head him off, losing now centrist and left-wing support to others and fragmenting now the entire political system to the extent of no one, of course, would splinter it any further. It would be the Brexit referendum all over again, but for years. Yeah, it would be, leave and remain. It would be leave and remain all over again. And that would not be good for our politics. It would be awful for our politics. Like, could you imagine every single general election being like the Brexit referendum? Like, I say that with all seriousness. Could you imagine what every single general election like that would be going forward? It would be awful. Anyway, so Nigel is, of course, the loudmouth at the back of the class, with a little band of his loyal followers and a girlfriend who goes to a different school. Making him the head teacher is now the last thing he wants, or is even capable of. He quits when the going gets tough. He makes friends with the worst people on the planet. And if he had the voice of Joe Pasquale rather than Sideshow Bob, he would have never have made it this far. His role in history has to be a relative in, of course, a 1,000-year-old gripe about the French, or for the benefit of himself, to now the detriment of the rest of us. If he was a real estate billionaire, he would be dangerous. Thank the Lord, he is just a big mouth prat in yellow trousers. And the fact that they will never win is only one reason they exist. That's true. That is very true. And I think, honestly, 100% right. 100% right. We've talked about this before. If he wins somehow bigly, he gets the mayoralship. Look how big Andy Burnham is. Look at all the press Andy Burnham gets. That's because Andy Burnham is doing stuff up in the Manchester City region. If things start to go wrong in that particular region, let's say with, I don't know, let's say Aaron Banks somehow manages to win, or the guy in Hull manages to win, good luck. Good luck with that, because you've got responsibility, and you said reform can fix all this. What happens when you can't fix that? When you can't do all that stuff? Whoops. The last thing Nigel Farage actually wants to do is win. It's the worst thing that could ever happen to him. The worst thing that could ever happen to him is he wins. Now, we'll tell you this now. Tomorrow, on Friday, where we probably get more of the results, maybe going into sort of the weekend, because, like I say, particularly, I really want to look at what the turnout is in some of these races. Yeah, we'll see what the final score brings us. But like I say, I'll tell you this now: the turnout is going to be low. The turnout is going to be so low. I've got a friend in Hull, and they are like, they didn't even realize there was a local election. They didn't even realize there was a vote for the mayor until they got a letter through. And you're like, okay. So, yeah, interesting times. And like I say, we'll see what happens on Friday and, of course, over the weekend. But, of course, until then, we'll see you all next time. And, of course, let me know what you think down in the comments below. So, until then, we'll see you all very soon.